Well, in this video tutorial, we're going to go over some steps to move clips around in the timeline. Now that we've got a basic understanding of three-point editing and how to do an insert edit and an overwrite edit, those concepts will actually be pretty fresh in this video as well. We're going to move some clips, rearrange the shots in a timeline. Now, I had mentioned earlier that it's very useful to use keyboard shortcuts and to do as much editing with your hands on the keyboard as you can. It's better to do that than to mouse around the timeline. You can just make some mistakes and it takes a lot longer, quite frankly, and is less efficient. However, I'll show you a few techniques here that do involve moving the mouse around with a clip, but there are a couple of precautions and I'll outline those as we go. Well, let's say we've got a sequence all lined up here and it has some shots of this event. This goes back to the book signing sequence where the author is meeting some of the readers and fans and signing some copies of the book at this gallery up in Dahlonega. So I've got a pretty well laid out sequence of shots in a pretty logical order. This might be going over a VO script that the anchor would read, or if it later became a package, we could recut it. But let's just say I want to move some shots around. And well, quite simply what I can do is, before starting, I want to expand my timeline so you can see it full screen. And remember, there's a keyboard shortcut to do that, the tilde key. Once this is active, the timeline window, I push the tilde and now it is open full screen. So that's real nice. I can also, if I want to get in close on just a particular shot and look at this area of the timeline close up, even in this giant window, I can simply use the zoom in and zoom out keys. If I want to zoom in, it's just the plus key on the keyboard. So let's hit plus and see what happens. See how we're moving in tighter and tighter just on that picture 17 or the clip number 17. If I hit the minus key, I will be zooming out. So I can keep zooming out all the way or zooming in with the plus key. So those are very handy when you're working inside the timeline. I can also make my tracks a little bit bigger if I cursor over or mouse over just this top line of the video 1, separating it from video 2, grab that little line and then move upward. I've just sort of increased the size of my video track. I can shrink it back down. I've got the audio track open by hitting this little reveal arrow, and I can see the waveforms there and then open that up much bigger as well. You can kind of see which clips of sound have the most volume. So that's a good way to look at this for the exercise we're going to do. One more quick little zoom out just to see it. All right, so let's say we want to rearrange the shots or move a few shots around. I can simply just click on a clip, and as long as we have these linked together, this is the shot. It actually happens to be a close-up of the book itself. There's the nat sound that goes along with it. These are all linked together, so when I click one on the video track, it highlights both the video and the audio tracks. They are linked together. I could right-click and unlink them to prevent that from happening, but in this case I want to move everything, the video with the nat sound. So let's say I just want to take it, click it, drag it. I can drag it all the way to the right and just leave it over there. Well, you see what Premiere did is it basically did the opposite of an overwrite edit. It lifted the video out, I dragged it and then moved it over here so it performed the overwrite in this space. And I can just move it closer, farther away. I don't really like to do this too much because I'd rather put my shots in using the keyboard with my three-point editing. But if I did have to spread things out and rearrange them, I certainly could. Let's go back and move this shot back to the place it used to live. By the way, you notice that as I do move it around, a couple of things to highlight. Notice the little arrow symbol. It's a yellow arrow and it's pointing in a downward motion. So by default, when you click on any clip in the timeline, click it and you start to move it, you get that downward facing arrow. That's the overwrite symbol, meaning that wherever I let go, it's going to perform an overwrite edit. If I let go right here, it's going to take this shot number 17 of the book and drop it right over the top of this picture of her signing the book. So that's one thing that'll happen. Notice also how you see these triangles. Every time I bump up against an edit point, it sort of snaps into place. That's because there's a feature in here called snapping, which is turned on. It looks like this little horseshoe up here. You can activate it by hitting the S key. You can deactivate it or activate it. When it's pushed in like it's indented, that means it's activated. So anytime you drag, it'll snap to the edit points. And that's probably a good thing to leave on for now. So what I want to do is, let's say, move this shot. Let's say I did let go right here in the middle of the previous shot. and look what happens. It overwrites this section of shot 86. That's her signing it. It just drops a bunch of the shot of the book right over the top. So we have this really awkward looking sequence. She's signing, then it cuts to the book, then it's back to her signing. Probably not what we want, so we'll undo that. There's a better way to rearrange clips in the timeline this way laterally, and it's called a swap edit. Let's say I do want to move this shot, but I want to put it in front of the shot of her signing, between maybe these two shots. Or maybe I want to put the shot of the book at the very front of the sequence. Well, for that, we'll do what's called a swap edit. And in order to do that, you push a couple of modifier keys. One of the things you can do is when you push the clip in, again, by default, you push and drag, it becomes this overwrite edit. One of the things you can do is push the command key. Notice how the symbol changes. I grab the clip, start to move it, and if I push command, it switches from a downward arrow to a right-facing arrow. That means it's going to do an insert edit when I let go. It took the shot, moved it in front of the shot of her signing, but it left a big gap in the original location of that shot. So it did do an insert edit. It didn't overwrite any of this clip, which is good, but I've still got this gap. So again, you can modify that by clicking, pushing down command, and you go into insert mode. But the better edit is the swap edit that I mentioned, and to get there we do two keys, two modifiers. We push get the clip first, then push command and the option key. And then when you start to drag, look what happens to that symbol. It goes from that arrow to this insert arrow, but with a curved arrow underneath it, which means I'm going to swap. I'm going to take this clip, maybe put it in between these others, or put it at the very front of the sequence. Wherever I let go at that edit point, it's going to put this shot in that slot, and it's going to push everything else down to the right. So it basically just shuffled the deck, if you will, or swapped a few shots. It took the shot of the book from this location, put it in between these other shots, and it didn't leave a gap, and it did not do an overwrite. So that is a very effective way to just swap the order of clips. You grab the shot you want, push command, option, and then when you start to drag, you get that sort of swap symbol, and I'll just move it back to the original location. And there it is. So those are some ways you can move clips in the timeline. Again, there are some precautions you got to take. Know what you're doing with those modifier keys. That will help you a lot. Just try to avoid randomly grabbing and sliding shots. That's going to create a mess in your timeline, and you're going to spend a lot more time fixing that stuff than if you had just sort of followed those modifier keys. So that'll work much better for you.